It started with a spark. Well, not a literal one, but the kind that crackles in a room full of exhausted scientists who haven't slept in days and are running on recycled air and stubborn hope. On the far side of the moon, inside a buried lab carved into lunar rock, a small team had been chasing a dream. Most thought was pure fantasy, faster than light travel. Not the slow, generation-long voyages of old colony ships, but real, honest-to-goodness jumps across the stars, like flipping a page in a book and suddenly being somewhere else. For over a century, Earth had been stuck. Climate disasters, wars over water and clean air, cities sinking or burning, it had all left humanity battered and turned inward. Space was no longer about exploration. It was about survival. Mining asteroids, building domes on Mars, scraping by. But deep down, that old hunger to reach further, to see what was out there, never really died. It just got quieter. Then came the breakthrough. They called it the void shear drive. The idea wasn't to warp space gently like the old theory suggested. Instead, it punched a tiny, temporary hole through the fabric of reality itself, like threading a needle through the universe's skin. The first test was terrifying and beautiful. A probe vanished from lunar orbit and reappeared near Proxima Centauri b in under 3 hours. Cheers erupted. Tears were shed. Someone played an old Earth song, something with guitars and longing, and for a moment, it felt like humanity had finally turned a corner. But then came the glitch. During the third deep-range test, something went wrong. Not a crash, not an explosion, something stranger. The probe didn't just disappear. It was as if it had never existed at all. Back on the moon, the logs showed the launch, the countdown, the activation. But when they checked the deep space archives, there was no record of the probe ever being built. Even the engineers who'd worked on it for months suddenly had fuzzy memories, like trying to recall a dream. One technician swore he'd named the probe Starling. Another insisted no one had ever given it a name. The data was inconsistent, contradictory, like reality itself had hiccuped. The team leader, a quiet woman who'd spent her childhood watching Earth's coastlines vanish on old news feeds, ordered a lockdown. No outside comms. No reports. She knew what this looked like. Not just a malfunction, but a tear in cause and effect. If word got out, funding would vanish overnight. Governments would shut them down. And after everything, the decades of rebuilding, the last great push for something beyond survival, she couldn't let that happen. Not yet. But secrets don't stay buried in the digital age, especially not when you're transmitting encrypted bursts to orbital relays. Within weeks, rumors leaked. First on fringe science forums, then on planetary news nets. Humans crack FTL, screamed one headline. But at what cost? Asked another, citing anonymous sources who whispered about time echoes and ghost signals. Earth's fractured governments, always competing but now loosely united under the United Earth Directorate, saw opportunity. After centuries of being the galaxy's backwater, if the galaxy even knew they existed, they finally had leverage. They fast-tracked the Void Shear project, pouring resources into scaling it up. Not just for science, for ships, for defense, for claiming a place among the stars by force if needed. The scientists grew uneasy. They'd built a key, but they weren't sure what door it unlocked, or what might come through from the other side. The drive didn't just move matter. It seemed to nudge the edges of time and probability. Every test left behind a faint scar in space-time. A region where quantum noise spiked, where sensors glitched, where clocks ran a fraction too fast or too slow. They called it vacuum fatigue. Like bending a paperclip too many times, it still holds its shape, but it's weaker. One day it'll snap. Still, the pressure mounted. Colonies on Mars and the Jovian moons demanded protection. Resources were running low. If the Void Shear could get supply ships to Alpha Centauri in hours instead of decades, it could save millions. So they kept testing, kept pushing, and then one night while the moon's surface glowed under Earth's blue light, a deep space antenna picked up something unexpected. Not a signal from human probes, not cosmic background noise. It was structured, rhythmic, deliberate, and it was coming from just beyond the orbit of Neptune. Within 48 hours, 3 massive ships, sleek, silent, made of materials that bent light like water, appeared in lunar orbit. No warning.
No hail, they just
arrived. Humanity held its breath. First contact wasn't with a radio signal or a drifting artifact. It was with visitors who showed up at the front door, uninvited and unreadable. Through a painstaking exchange of math, light pulses, and shared physics models, communication began. The newcomers called themselves observers of the Galactic Concordance, a union of civilizations that had long watched Earth from a distance, waiting for the species to either destroy itself or grow up enough to join the wider community. They'd detected the void shear tests. And they were afraid, not of humanity's weapons, not of their ambitions, but of the drive itself. One of their envoys, speaking through a shimmering hologram that shifted colors with emotion, explained, "Your device doesn't travel through space. It cuts through the membrane that holds reality together. Each jump is a wound, small now, but wounds can bleed. And if too many bleed at once..." They didn't finish the sentence. They didn't need to. The scientists on the moon stared at each other in silence. The dream of the stars suddenly felt heavy, dangerous. What if they hadn't unlocked the future, but broken something irreplaceable? Back on Earth, leaders argued. Some wanted to shut it all down. Others saw the Concordance's fear as weakness, a chance to leapfrog into power. "They're scared of us," one general said in a closed-door meeting. "That means we're winning." But the woman who led the lab on the moon knew better. She looked out the viewport at the silent Earth hanging in the black, blue, and fragile, and wondered if humanity had just lit a fuse it couldn't put out. The breakthrough had been real. The danger was realer, and now the whole galaxy was watching. The arrival of the off-world ships changed everything. One moment humanity was alone in the dark, whispering into the void. The next, the void whispered back, and it sounded worried. At first, no one on Earth knew what to do. Panic flickered across news feeds, then settled into a strange mix of awe and anxiety. Governments scrambled. Military satellites tracked the alien vessels. But the ships didn't move, didn't broadcast, didn't threaten. They just hovered, calm and patient, like teachers waiting for a student to catch up. Then came the message. Not in words, not at first. It came as a pattern, a series of pulses that matched the rhythm of hydrogen decay, the heartbeat of the universe itself. Scientists recognized it instantly. This wasn't random noise. It was a handshake made of physics. Over the next few weeks, a fragile bridge of understanding formed. Using shared math, light frequencies, and even music, humanity's old Voyager recordings turned out to be surprisingly useful. They began to talk. The visitors called themselves part of the Galactic Concordance, a group of civilizations that had lived among the stars for thousands of years. They weren't conquerors. They were more like neighbors who'd been watching from over the fence, waiting to see if the new kid would set the yard on fire. And now, they were knocking. Through slow, careful translation, the Concordance explained their concern. They'd been monitoring Earth's radio chatter for centuries, our wars, our songs, our clumsy rockets. They'd seen us nearly wipe ourselves out more than once, but they never interfered. Their rule was simple: let young species find their own way, unless they threatened the balance of everything. And that's where the void shear drive came in. "It doesn't just move your ships," one envoy finally said. Their voice translated into soft, neutral tones that somehow still carried weight. "It tears the quantum substrate, the quiet layer beneath space and time that keeps cause and effect intact. Every jump leaves a scar. Small now, but scars can spread." The scientists on the moon listened in stunned silence. They'd seen the anomalies, the flickering data, the missing seconds, the probe that vanished from history. But they'd hoped it was just instrument error. Now, an ancient civilization was confirming their worst fear. They hadn't invented a shortcut through space. They'd invented a cosmic scalpel, and they were slicing the universe without knowing how deep the cuts went. Back on Earth, the reaction was split. Some people were terrified. Religious leaders called it playing God. Philosophers warned of unraveling reality itself. Parents hugged their kids a little tighter, wondering if the stars were now dangerous, but others saw opportunity. After centuries of being earthbound, of fighting over scraps while the galaxy stayed silent, here was a chance to finally stand tall. "They're scared of us," said a high-ranking official during a tense global council session. "That means we have power, real power. The Concordance didn't ask for war. They asked for restraint. Through their envoys, they laid out something called the Prime Stability Accord, a set of rules every spacefaring species agreed to follow. No weapons that warp time, no experiments that risk vacuum decay, and absolutely no drives that shear the fabric of spacetime. They weren't trying to hold humanity back, they insisted. They were trying to keep the universe from fraying at the edges. But Earth's leaders were tired of being told what to do. Tired of rationing water, of rebuilding cities, of watching their children grow up under domes because the open sky was too hot or too toxic. If the void shear could get them to new worlds, green, clean, untouched worlds, why should they stop now? Especially when the very beings who'd ignored them for centuries were suddenly showing up to say no? So the answer came no, not in those exact words, of course. Diplomacy is rarely that blunt. But the message was clear. Earth would continue developing the drive. For science, for survival, for sovereignty. The Concordants didn't react with anger. They reacted with sorrow. One envoy, their forms shimmering like heat haze over desert sand, said quietly, "You do not understand what you hold. Fire warms. Fire also burns, but this is not fire. It is the unraveling of the loom." Still, they didn't leave. They stayed in orbit watching, waiting. Meanwhile, on the ground, humanity pushed forward. Factories on Mars and the asteroid belt began retrofitting colony ships with early void shear prototypes. The first manned test was scheduled within months. Volunteers lined up, not soldiers, but engineers, doctors, farmers, people who dreamed of planting Earth seeds on alien soil before they died. The scientists who'd built the drive were torn. They believed in exploration. But they also saw the data. Each test made the scars worse. Sensors near jump zones reported strange echoes. Ghost signals from no known source, flashes of light with no origin, moments where gravity seemed to stutter. One technician swore he saw his own hand flicker out of existence for half a second during a calibration run. No one else saw it. But he never worked near the drive again. Public opinion swayed like a leaf in a storm. One day, crowds cheered the drive as humanity's ticket to the stars. The next, protests filled city squares with signs reading, "Don't break the sky" and "We belong to Earth." Not the void. The Concordants sent more messages. Calm, urgent, full of data from other species who'd tried similar things, and failed. One civilization, they said, had vanished not with a bang, but with a silence so complete that even their past light stopped reaching distant stars. Another had triggered a chain reaction that turned an entire spiral arm of their galaxy into static. But Earth had heard doomsaying before. Climate warnings, pandemic alerts, nuclear close calls, and somehow they'd always pulled through. Maybe this was just another test, another wall to climb, so they kept building, kept testing, kept dreaming. And the Concordants watched, their ships unmoving, their silence louder than any warning. Deep in the lunar lab, the lead scientist stared at a screen showing the latest jump simulation. A tiny red line pulsed where space-time should be smooth. She thought about the envoy's words. "You are not just travelers. You are weavers, and every thread you pull must be chosen with care." She wanted to believe humanity could be careful, but she also knew how desperate they were. And desperation doesn't ask permission. It just jumps. The galaxy held its breath. Earth took another step forward, and somewhere in the quiet between stars, the fabric of reality trembled. Just a little. Defiance has a cost, and humanity was about to learn what that cost really looked like. Despite the warnings, despite the strange glitches and the uneasy silence from the off-world ships still hovering near the moon, Earth's leadership gave the order, "Go." The Pathfinder, a sleek armored vessel retrofitted with the most powerful void shear drive ever built, was cleared for a deep-range mission to the Tau Ceti system. Not just to explore, to claim, to plant a flag on a world rich with water, minerals, and breathable air. A fresh start, a second chance. The crew knew the risks. They'd seen the reports, the flickering sensors, the time skips, the way some engineers refused to go near the drive chamber after dark. But they also believed in the mission. After generations of living on a wounded planet, the idea of standing under an alien sun, breathing open air, felt like salvation. So they suited up, said goodbye to families through crackling video calls, and launched. At first, everything went perfectly. The jump sequence initiated, space folded, light bent, and in less than an hour, the Pathfinder dropped out of FTL. Near the fourth planet of Tau Ceti, a blue-green marble hanging in the black, almost like Earth used to be. Then it happened. No explosion, no alarm. Just a sudden, deep silence, like the universe had taken a breath and forgotten to let it out. The ship's instruments went wild. Gravity readings spiked, then flatlined. Timestamps jumped backward. The stars outside the viewport blurred. Not like motion blur, but like reality itself was smearing at the edges. And then the tear opened. It wasn't visible at first. No flash, no fire. But sensors screamed. The quantum vacuum, the quiet, invisible foundation of everything, was unraveling. A rift, no bigger than a city at first, began to grow. It didn't suck things in, it didn't explode outward. It just undid them. Rock turned to static. Light lost its direction. Matter forgot what it was supposed to be. The Pathfinder vanished. Not destroyed. Erased. As if it had never existed. But the damage didn't stop there. The rift kept growing. Slowly at first, then faster. It reached a nearby asteroid belt, and the rocks didn't shatter. They dissolved into shimmering noise, like old TV static made real. Then it touched 3 small observation outposts the Galactic Concordance had placed in the system decades ago to monitor stellar activity. One moment they were there, transmitting data, humming with life support. The next, they were gone. Not just destroyed, removed from history. Back on their homeworlds, families of the observers suddenly had no memory of them. Records showed empty duty logs. It was as if those lives had never been lived. When the news reached Earth, disbelief turned to dread. The Concordance ships near the moon went dark. All communication ceased. Then a single message arrived, not translated, not softened. Raw, urgent, in every human language at once. You have torn the veil. Contain it. Or we will. Panic spread faster than any virus. On Mars, colonists demanded evacuation ships. In orbital stations, people prayed or raged or just stared out the windows, wondering if the stars were still real. Scientists scrambled to analyze the data from the last moments of the Pathfinder. What they found chilled them to the bone. The rift wasn't slowing down. It was feeding. Every particle it consumed released more vacuum energy, which made it grow. It was a chain reaction, and if it reached a certain size, it might not stop at one star system. It might keep going. Forever. Back on Earth, protests turned into riots in some cities. Others fell eerily quiet. Parents held their children close, not knowing if tomorrow would still follow today in the right order. Some people started calling it the unmaking. Others refused to believe it was real. Just fear-mongering, they said. But then the sky over Mars flickered. For 3 seconds, the sun turned violet. Clocks on the surface ran backward for 17 minutes. That was real enough. The Concordance didn't attack. They didn't need to. Their silence was punishment enough. Trade routes froze. Data exchanges stopped. Even the quiet monitoring drones that had helped Earth track solar flares for decades went offline. Humanity was being cut off, not with violence, but with absence. Like a parent stepping back to let a child feel the heat of the stove. Inside the lunar lab, the team that built the Void Shear Drive sat in stunned silence. They hadn't wanted this. They'd dreamed of connection, not catastrophe. One of them played an old recording. A child's voice from the 21st century, laughing while chasing fireflies in a backyard that no longer existed. "We just wanted to go see," they whispered. "We didn't mean to break anything. But intention doesn't fix reality. Only action does." Governments argued. Some wanted to destroy all drive prototypes. Others insisted they needed more jumps, to study the rift, to find a way to reverse it. "We caused this," one leader said. "We have to fix it." But how do you fix a hole in the rules of existence? Then came the worst news yet. A second, smaller rift had appeared near Mars. Not from a jump, just spontaneously. Like the first tear had weakened the fabric so much that reality was starting to fray on its own. Scientists called it space-time fatigue, like a worn-out rope finally snapping under its own weight. The Concordants finally broke their silence, not with threats, but with a warning wrapped in sorrow. "You are not the first," their message read. "Others have tried to rush the stars. They are gone, not dead, unwritten. Do not become a footnote in a universe that forgets you." But Earth was stubborn, proud, scared, and still hopeful. In secret, a rogue faction within the Earth Defense Command launched another ship, smaller, faster, toward a habitable world in the Epsilon Eridani system. Their plan: jump in, drop colonization pods, jump out. One last gamble before the Concordants locked them away forever. The ship activated its void shear drive and vanished mid-transit. Not at its destination, not in a rift. Just gone. No signal. No debris. No echo. As if the universe had flinched and deleted it from the story. That was the moment humanity realized. This wasn't just dangerous. It was forbidden for a reason. The stars weren't waiting to be claimed. They were watching. And they remembered every mistake. The silence that followed was heavier than any explosion. Earth's last desperate jump had vanished without a trace, and with it, the illusion that humanity could outmaneuver the laws of the universe. The Galactic Concordants didn't celebrate. They didn't gloat. They simply sent a new message, clear, calm, and final. You are summoned. Not to war. Not to surrender, but to judgment. The location was a place most humans had never heard of. A vast ring-shaped world orbiting a quiet star, built not by one species, but by many, over thousands of years. They called it Oryx Prime, and it served as the heart of the Concordance's legal and ethical council. Earth had no choice but to go. Refusing would mean total isolation. No trade, no data, no help if another rift opened near home. And after the flickering skies over Mars, no one wanted to test that fate. A small delegation was chosen. Not generals, not politicians, but scientists, ethicists, and one quiet engineer who'd helped build the first void shear prototype. They traveled on a concordance vessel, smooth, silent, and strangely comforting, like being inside a living thought. There were no engines roaring, no artificial gravity humming, just stillness and stars that didn't flicker. When they arrived at Oryx Prime, they weren't met with guards or weapons. Instead, they walked into a chamber shaped like a spiral shell, its walls shifting colors with the mood of the room. Around them sat representatives of 17 species, some insect-like, some crystalline, some barely visible, more like patterns of light than bodies. None spoke at first. They just watched, not with anger, but with a deep ancient sadness, like parents watching a child play with matches near dry grass. Then the trial began. It wasn't like Earth's courts. No shouting lawyers, no dramatic accusations, just questions. Calm, precise, and devastating. Did you understand the risk before you activated the drive? Did you ignore warnings because you believed your need outweighed universal safety? Do you accept that your actions may have already doomed regions of space-time beyond repair? The human delegation answered honestly. They admitted they'd hoped the anomalies were temporary, that they'd believed they could control the uncontrollable. That desperation had clouded their judgment. One scientist even broke down, not from fear but from shame. "We just wanted a future," they said, voice cracking. "We didn't realize we might erase the past." Data was presented, stark, undeniable. Simulations showed how the Tau Ceti rift was still growing, slowly but steadily. Worse, quantum echoes from the failed Epsilon Eridani jump suggested the tear had branched into multiple timelines, some of which were now collapsing into each other. The Concordance called it causal pollution, like dumping poison into a river that flows through every moment of time. Some members of the council argued for immediate quarantine. Seal off the Sol system with a barrier that would block all FTL travel in or out. Let humanity live out its days on its broken world, safe but alone. Others pushed for something harsher, a full technological embargo, stripping Earth of even basic spaceflight until they proved they could be trusted. But then, something unexpected happened. One of the oldest Concordance members, a being whose form resembled slow-moving starlight, spoke not in judgment but in memory. "We too once reached too far," they said, their voice like wind through ancient trees. We built a machine to speak with the dead, it worked. But it also unraveled the boundary between life and memory. We lost entire cities, not to fire, but to forgetting. We rebuilt. We learned. Perhaps you can too. That single moment changed the tone of the trial. It wasn't just about punishment anymore. It was about possibility. Back on Earth, the news of the trial spread like wildfire. People gathered in public squares, not to protest, but to listen. For the first time in generations, the whole planet felt like one community. Scared, yes, but also united by a shared mistake. Schools paused lessons to discuss responsibility. Artists painted murals of frayed threads and mended cloth. Even old enemies, nations that had fought over water and borders, issued joint statements. We acted as one. We will answer as one. Meanwhile, in orbit, the Concordance ships remained, but their posture had shifted. Less like jailers, more like teachers waiting to see if the student was ready to learn. Then came the ultimatum. The Concordance offered a choice. Surrender all void shear technology. Every blueprint, every prototype, every line of code. Agree to a planetary quarantine that would last until the rifts stabilized, and submit to oversight. Concordance observers would live among humans, not to control them, but to guide them toward safer science. Refuse, and face total severance. No more off-world help. No more shared knowledge. Earth would be left to its own devices, on a planet still healing, with a sky that sometimes flickered when no one was looking. The debate on Earth was fierce. Some called it humiliation, others called it survival. But the memory of the vanished ships, the erased outposts, the violet sun over Mars, it all weighed heavier than pride. In the end, the vote was nearly unanimous. Humanity would comply. The scientist who'd led the original Drive project stood before the Global Council, not as a hero or a villain, but as a witness. We thought the stars were ours to take, they said. But maybe they're not a prize. Maybe they're a promise, if we're careful, if we're kind, if we remember that we're part of something much bigger than ourselves. As the decision was transmitted to Oryx Prime, something strange happened. The Concordance ships near the moon pulsed once, softly, like a sigh of relief. And for the first time in months, the stars above Earth looked steady again. The trial wasn't over. The consequences would last generations. But for the first time since the Drive was invented, humanity wasn't racing forward blindly. They were learning to walk, slowly, carefully, with their eyes open. After the trial, silence returned, but this time it wasn't the silence of fear. It was the quiet of people finally listening. Earth had agreed to the Concordance's terms. All void shear prototypes were dismantled. Every line of code was handed over. Blueprints were sealed in vaults watched by both human and alien observers. The quarantine wasn't a prison, it was a pause. A chance to breathe, to reflect, to learn what it really meant to be part of a living universe. At first, it felt like defeat. Cities that had dreamed of starfaring futures turned inward again. Kids who'd pinned maps of distant worlds to their walls now studied physics with a new kind of hunger. Not to conquer space, but to understand it. But slowly, something unexpected began to grow. Humility. And from humility came curiosity of a different kind. The scientist who'd once led the Drive project didn't disappear in shame. Instead, they asked the Concordance for help, not to build something new, but to fix what was broken. We made the wound, they said. Let us help heal it. To everyone's surprise, the Concordance agreed. What followed wasn't a race. It was a collaboration. Human engineers worked side by side with beings whose biology ran on light and resonance. Labs were built not on the moon, but in neutral orbit, shared spaces where language barriers were crossed with diagrams, gestures, and shared wonder. The goal wasn't speed or power anymore. It was repair. They called the new project the Stitch Drive, not because it moved ships, but because it wove space-time back together. The idea was wild, almost poetic. Instead of tearing a hole, they'd send out gentle pulses of entangled particles that would knit the quantum fabric back into place. Like mending a torn net with threads of pure attention. It wouldn't be fast. It wouldn't be flashy. But if it worked, it could undo the damage. Years passed. Failures piled up. Test after test showed only tiny improvements. Ripples that faded before they could close a scar. Doubt crept in. Some said the rifts were permanent. That humanity's mistake was too big to fix. But the team kept going, driven not by pride, but by responsibility. Then, one quiet morning in deep space near the edge of the Tau Ceti scar, It happened. The stitch drive hummed to life, not with a roar, but with a soft chime like a bell ringing underwater. A field of coherent quantum energy spread outward, not pushing, not pulling, just connecting. For 3 minutes, sensors showed something impossible. The entropy in the rift began to reverse. Static turned back into rock. Light remembered its path. The scar shrank, just a little, but enough. Back on Earth, people held their breath. When the data confirmed it, real, repeatable, stable, there were no cheers. Just tears. Not of victory, but of relief. Like a child finally apologizing after breaking something precious and being told, "It's okay. We can fix it together." The Concordance didn't throw a celebration, but they did something rare. They invited Earth to join a joint mission. Not as students, as partners. Over the next decade, human-built stitch drives, small, precise, and carefully regulated, were deployed across the galaxy, not to explore, but to heal. They mended old wounds left by other civilizations long gone. They stabilized regions where reality had grown thin, and with each repair, trust grew. Earth's colonies on Mars and the moons of Jupiter began to thrive, not through conquest, but through cooperation. Concordance knowledge helped restore damaged ecosystems. Human creativity helped design new kinds of sustainable habitats. It wasn't perfect. Old habits died hard. But the shared work gave everyone a new story to tell, not about who was strongest, but who could care the most. And then came the day no one expected. The quarantine ended, not with a fanfare, but with a simple message from Oryx Prime: "You are ready." Earth wasn't granted full membership in the Concordance, not yet. But they were given provisional status, a seat at the table, a voice in the conversations about cosmic ethics, interstellar travel, and the care of space-time itself. It wasn't the triumphant arrival humanity had once imagined. It was quieter, deeper, real. The first official human delegate to the Concordance Council stood before the spiral chamber, not in uniform, but in simple clothes woven from Earth cotton and Martian silk. They didn't speak of power or destiny. They spoke of gratitude, of lessons learned the hard way, of how breaking something can teach you how to hold it gently. Afterward, children on Earth looked up at the stars not with hunger, but with respect. They knew now that the universe wasn't empty space waiting to be filled. It was a living web, delicate, ancient, and deeply connected. And every choice mattered. Back in the old lunar lab, now a museum and learning center, a new generation of students gathered around a display showing the original void shear schematic. But beside it hung a newer diagram, the stitch drive glowing softly under glass. A teacher asked, "Which one changed the world more?" A student thought for a moment, then said, "The first one showed us how far we could go. The second one showed us why we should care how we get there." And that, more than any jump or discovery, was humanity's real breakthrough. They hadn't just reached the stars. They'd learned to walk among them without leaving footprints that couldn't be erased. The dream hadn't died, it had grown up. And in doing so, it had finally become worthy of the universe it longed to join.